The call came at 5:47 inches the morning on a Wednesday. I was already up, the way I always am since my wife passed. Sleep stopped being reliable around the time grief became permanent. I was standing at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee, watching the fog sit low over the ridge behind my house in Brevard, when my phone lit up on the counter. It was my daughter-in-law. "Dad, it's Karen." "Don't panic, but Thomas is in the hospital. They brought him in last night. It's serious." My son's name is Thomas. He is 38 years old, a structural engineer in Charlotte, married to Karen for 12 years, father to 2 kids I would walk through fire for. He does not frighten easily, and he does not call for help unless he absolutely needs it. The fact that Karen was calling me at dawn told me everything. I was in the car before she finished explaining. The drive from Brevard to Charlotte takes just under 2 hours on a good day. I made it in 90 minutes. Thomas was in the hematology unit at Atrium Health. He looked smaller than I remembered, which is a strange thing to notice about a man who has been bigger than me since he was 17. He was pale in a way that went beyond tired, the kind of pale that lives under the skin. Karen was beside his bed, still wearing the clothes she had put on the night before. The kids were with her mother. "Dad," Thomas said when he saw me, "you didn't have to drive up." "Of course I did. What are we dealing with?" The hematologist came in an hour later. A careful, thorough man who explained things the way I used to explain things to parents at parent-teacher conferences, gently but without softening the edges. Thomas had severe aplastic anemia. His bone marrow had essentially stopped producing healthy blood cells. Without a bone marrow transplant, the prognosis was poor. They had already run tests on Karen. She was not a match. They would search the National Registry, but the best chances always came from a biological relative. "I am his father," I said. "Test me." The doctor nodded. "We can do that today if you're ready." I have been ready my entire life to do anything for that boy. I met my wife, Margaret, at a county fair in 1984. She was 22 and working the ticket booth for a church fundraiser, and she had a laugh that you could hear from 3 booths away. We were married 14 months later in her parents' backyard. Thomas came along in 1986. We were young and broke and completely unprepared, and we were happy in the way that only people who don't know any better can be happy. I spent 31 years as a teacher and then a principal at the same school district in Transylvania County. Margaret taught 2nd grade for 24 years at the elementary school 3 miles from our house. We raised Thomas in the same house where I still live, the one with the vegetable garden she planted every spring and the porch swing she picked out from a catalog in 1993. She died 3 years ago from pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks after the diagnosis. It was the fastest and cruelest thing I have ever witnessed, and I would give every year I have left to have her back. Thomas has her eyes. The exact same shape, the same color, that particular shade of brown that goes amber in direct sunlight. I used to tell him that all the time when he was young. "You've got your mother's eyes, Thomas." He would groan and roll his and say, "Dad, you tell me that every single time," and I would tell him I would keep telling him until he appreciated it. The compatibility test took about 90 minutes. I sat in a small room off the main lab while a quiet technician drew blood and swabbed my cheek and asked me to fill out a medical history form. It felt routine. It felt like something I should have been allowed to do, something simple and necessary that any father would do for his son without a second thought. The results, they told me, would take a few hours. I went back up to Thomas's room and sat with him and Karen. We talked about ordinary things, the kids' school schedules, the garden I was trying to keep going in Margaret's memory, a fishing trip Thomas and I had been meaning to take for 2 years and kept postponing. We did not talk about what would happen if I wasn't a match. There wasn't anything useful to say about that, so we didn't say it. At around 4 in the afternoon, a nurse came to tell me that Dr. Halston would like to speak with me privately. Privately. I noticed that word. I told Thomas and Karen I would be right back. Dr. Halston was waiting for me in a small conference room on the 3rd floor, but he was not alone. There was a woman I had not seen before, introduced to me as Dr. Reeves, a geneticist on staff, and a third person, a hospital administrator whose role I never entirely understood. 3 people to tell me I wasn't a match felt like more than the situation required. Please sit down, Mr. Calloway. I sat. Dr. Halston folded his hands on the table and looked at me with the expression that doctors learn in whatever course they take on delivering bad news. I have seen that expression before. I saw it when they told me about Margaret. I knew before he opened his mouth that whatever was coming was going to change things permanently. Mr. Calloway, we ran your compatibility test twice. There were some irregularities in the initial results, which is why we brought in Dr. Reeves. She's been reviewing the full genetic panel. What kind of irregularities? Dr. Reeves leaned forward. She was a precise woman, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a manner that suggested she preferred data to conversation. Mr. Calloway, the genetic markers in your sample do not align with Thomas's. We've ruled out any lab error. The conclusion is consistent across both tests. Say it plainly, please. She said it plainly. The DNA analysis indicates that you are not Thomas's biological father. There is no paternal genetic connection between you. The room did not spin the way it does in stories. It just went very still. Like someone had turned down the volume on everything, the ventilation hum, the sound from the corridor outside, my own breathing. That's not possible. He's my son. I was in the delivery room. I cut the cord. We understand this is not what you expected to hear. Dr. Halston's voice was careful. These results don't reflect anything about the relationship you have with Thomas, but the biology is unambiguous. I stared at the folder on the table between us. I thought about Thomas's face that morning when I walked into his hospital room, the way he looked, relieved and embarrassed at the same time, the way grown sons always look when they realize they need their fathers. I thought about Margaret. Dr. Reeves cleared her throat. There's something else, Mr. Calloway. Something in the genetic profile we think you should be aware of. More? The markers we found suggest a close family connection to the biological father. Not just a stranger, someone closely related to you. The genetic overlap is significant. What does that mean? It means the biological father is likely a first-degree relative. A brother, or possibly a half-sibling. I have one brother. His name is Dennis. He is 4 years younger than me. He was the best man at my wedding. I did not cry in that conference room. I thanked the doctors. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button for the lobby. And I stood outside on the hospital sidewalk in the late afternoon light for a long time, watching cars pull in and out of the parking deck, thinking about a version of my life that had apparently never been what I believed it was. Margaret had been dead for 3 years. She could not explain herself. She could not apologize. She could not tell me why, and there was no possibility of asking her, no phone call I could make to get answers from the person who owed them to me. She was gone, and she had taken the whole story with her. My brother Dennis lived 45 minutes from this hospital. I called him from the parking lot. He answered on the second ring, the way he always does, the same cheerful hello he's been using since we were kids, and the phone was something mounted to the kitchen wall. I could hear the television in his background. He was probably watching baseball. I need you to come to Atrium Health in Charlotte. Tonight. Ray? What's wrong? Is it Thomas? Come to the hospital, Dennis. I will explain when you get here. There was a pause. Okay. I'll be there in an hour. I went back up to Thomas's room, and I stayed there for that hour. Karen stepped out to get coffee, and I sat with my son, and he asked me what Dr. Halston had said, and I told him we were still working through the results, that I might not be the right match, but we were exploring other options. Thomas looked at me with those amber eyes that I used to call his mother's eyes, and I felt something shift inside my chest in a way I cannot adequately describe. He still looked like mine. He had always looked like mine. Dennis arrived at 7 o'clock. I met him in the lobby. He was wearing a Braves cap and a flannel shirt, same as he'd worn to half the events of our shared lifetime. He looked at my face, and his expression shifted. What happened? I told him. All of it. The test. The results. What the geneticist had said. The words, close family relative. I said it without raising my voice, standing near the windows by the main entrance, Because I had spent 31 years as a principal and I had learned a long time ago that keeping your voice level is more frightening than yelling. Dennis did not say it was impossible. He did not tell me there must be a mistake. He took off his cap and stared at the floor. That told me everything. How long? He didn't answer right away. How long, Dennis? He exhaled. It started before you were married. It was over before Thomas was born. I thought it was over. We thought it was a mistake, something we'd both put behind us. When Margaret got pregnant, she told me it had to be yours. Statistically, you were together far more than we had ever been. She said she was certain. She said she never wanted to discuss it again. You thought, she said. She was certain. Ray, don't say my name like that. Were you the only one? Dennis looked up. Yes, I swear to you. It was only me. She ended it herself, completely. She chose you. She always chose you. She chose me. I thought about what that meant for a moment. She chose me and then spent 38 years carrying a secret that belonged to me as much as it belonged to her. She died without telling me. She took it and she buried it, and she left me with a life that was built partly on a foundation I never had the chance to examine. I need you to get tested tonight. Thomas needs a bone marrow donor. You might be a match. Dennis looked up at me. Ray, I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I know you are. Get tested. He was tested that night. We sat in the same hallway for 2 hours without speaking more than a dozen words to each other. I thought about all the holidays we had spent together, all the Christmases, all the times Dennis had come to Thomas's baseball games and coached him through his first fishing trip and sat at our kitchen table and eaten Margaret's cooking. I thought about what that looked like now, from the outside, from some impossible remove. Then I thought about Thomas upstairs in his hospital bed, and I stopped thinking about anything else. The match results came back the following morning. Dr. Halston called us both into the same conference room. Mr. Calloway, he said, looking at Dennis. You are a strong match. Not perfect, but well within the threshold for a successful transplant. If you're willing to proceed, we can schedule the donation within the week. Dennis looked at me before he answered. I'll do whatever needs to be done, Dennis said. Whatever Thomas needs. Good, I said. Talk to the doctors. Sign what you have to sign. I'm going to go see my son. I had not slept. I had not eaten anything since the cup of coffee I'd had before Karen's call the morning before. I was 63 years old, and I felt every one of those years as I walked down the hallway toward Thomas's room. But I also felt something else, something underneath the exhaustion and the grief and the anger, something that was harder to name. It felt like clarity. Like the version of my life that had been constructed partly from illusion was finally becoming, for the first time, fully and uncomplicatedly real. Thomas knew something was wrong the moment I walked in. He had always been perceptive in that particular way, the way children become perceptive when they grow up in a house with a parent who believes in honesty. He looked at me the way he used to look at me when he was 12 and had done something he hadn't told me about yet, braced for whatever was coming. Karen stepped out without being asked. I sat down in the chair beside his bed. I am not your biological father, I said. We found out when they ran the tests. The DNA doesn't match. Your biological father is Dennis. The silence was long. Thomas looked at the ceiling. His jaw worked without producing any sound. Uncle Dennis. Yes. He was here last night. He was tested this morning. He's a strong match. He's going to donate. Thomas closed his eyes. I watched him process it the way I had watched him process hard things his whole life, the way he had processed his mother's diagnosis, the way he had processed the death itself. He goes quiet. He goes still. And then something in his face resolves. Is that why you look like you haven't slept? He said finally. I have not slept. He opened his eyes. Does it change things? For you? I had been asking myself that question since the parking lot. I had asked it during the 2 hours I sat in the hallway while Dennis got his blood drawn. I had asked it every time I looked at my phone and thought about calling someone and then realized there was no one left to call who would understand the weight of it. No, I said. It changes facts. It doesn't change anything else. Thomas was quiet for another moment. He turned his head to look at me. Mom knew? It wasn't a question. I think she did. He exhaled. That's going to be the hard part. Not the DNA. Not Dennis. Processing that she knew, and she never said anything. I know. She loved you, Dad. Whatever else she did wrong, she loved you. She talked about you every single time I called her. Every single time. I sat with that for a moment. I know she did. And I loved her. I love her still. Which is part of what makes it complicated. He reached over and put his hand on mine. He hadn't done that since the day of his mother's funeral. I am your son, he said. I don't care what a test says. You are my father. That is not a question I am interested in revisiting. I don't have the words for what that moment was. I have been a teacher, a principal, a husband, a father, and I have spent my life around language, using it to explain things and to build things and occasionally to repair things. But there are moments that words can only gesture toward from a respectful distance. That was one of them. Dennis donated his bone marrow 8 days later. The procedure went without complication. Within 2 weeks, there were early signs that Thomas's marrow was responding. The doctors were cautious but encouraged. By the end of the month, they used the word promising. By the end of the second month, they used the word remission. My son was going to live. Dennis came to the hospital twice during Thomas's recovery. The first visit was awkward in the way that unavoidable things are awkward, the air heavy with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. Thomas was polite to him, the way Thomas is polite to everyone, with a core of warmth underneath good manners. But he also made it clear, not unkindly, that he understood the nature of what Dennis had done, both in 1985 and in the 38 years that followed. You knew there was a possibility, Thomas said to him on the second visit. You could have said something. Dennis had no defense for that, because there is no defense for it. He had told himself the same story that Margaret had told herself, that the odds were in favor of Raymond, that reopening the question would cause more harm than letting it lie. People tell themselves those stories when the truth is too expensive. He had told it for 38 years while sitting at my Thanksgiving table and shaking my hand at Christmas and watching my son grow up. I'm sorry, was what Dennis said. For everything. I'm sorry. Thomas nodded. He accepted the apology the way a grown man accepts an apology he knows is sincere but insufficient. Completely, but without pretending it settled the debt. Dennis went back to his life. He called me twice in the months that followed. I answered both times. I don't know what we are to each other now. Brothers still, I suppose, in the biological sense, in the way that shares blood and history and the specific geography of a particular childhood. But the thing that lived in that word before, the easy trust, the assumption of loyalty, that is gone. Maybe it comes back, maybe it doesn't. I am 63 years old and I have learned not to make promises about what the future will look like. What I know is this. I am Thomas's father. I was his father when I drove 90 minutes in the dark to a hospital in Charlotte. And I was his father when I sat in a conference room and learned a fact that should have changed everything but didn't. I was his father in every school pickup and every little league game and every late-night conversation at the kitchen table when he was 17 and trying to figure out who he was going to be. Biology does not account for any of that. Biology is a starting point. It is not the story. Karen told me something. A few weeks after Thomas came home from the hospital. She said that when Thomas was in his second year of college, he had called Margaret out of the blue one afternoon and asked her a question she hadn't been expecting. He said, "Mom, do you think Dad would have been my father even if things had been different? If the circumstances had been different?" And Margaret had said, without a pause, "Your father has been your father since before you were born. Some things aren't biological, Thomas. Some things are just true." Karen cried when she told me that. I did not, but only because I had done my crying in other places, in private, in the car at the end of long days, in the vegetable garden where Margaret's influence is still visible in every row. I go to Charlotte every 3 weeks now. I'd take the grandchildren to the park and push them on the swings the way I pushed Thomas on the swing set in our backyard in Brevard 35 years ago. I help Karen with dinner. I sit on their back porch in the evening and drink one beer and watch the neighborhood go quiet. Last week, Thomas came out to the porch and sat down beside me. He had color in his face again, something I hadn't seen since before the diagnosis. He looked like himself. He looked like the man he has been becoming his whole life. "Grandkids asleep?" I asked. "Finally," he said. "Emma's been on a campaign to stay up later. She's going to be exhausting when she's a teenager. She's already exhausting. She gets that from you." He smiled. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the yard. "I've been thinking about Mom," he said. "I'm always thinking about your mother. I'm not angry at her. I was for a little while, after I found out. But I'm not anymore." He turned to look at me. "I think she was scared. I think she made a choice that protected the thing she loved most, which was the family she had with you. I don't think she thought about what it would cost you, not really. But I don't think she was cruel. I think she was just afraid." "That is a generous reading," I said. "Maybe," he shrugged. "But I also think it's probably right. She wasn't the kind of person who made decisions out of cruelty. She made them out of fear, which doesn't make it okay, but it makes it human. I considered that for a long time." The night bugs were getting loud. A neighbor, 2 houses down, was coming in through their back door, calling for their dog. "You're a better person than I am," I said. "You taught me how," he said. "That's kind of your fault," I laughed. It surprised me. Genuine laughter. The kind that comes up without your permission. And it felt like something released, something that had been held very tight for a very long time. Thomas reached over and squeezed my shoulder the way men of his generation do when they mean something they are not quite ready to say out loud. "I'm glad you came to that hospital," he said. "First thing. I'm glad that was still your instinct, even now, knowing everything." "It was never a question," I told him. "Not for a single second." He nodded. He finished his beer. He went back inside to check on the kids. I stayed on the porch a while longer, the way I have been staying on porches my whole life, watching things settle. I thought about Margaret, the way I always think about Margaret, with that particular combination of love and grief and now something new, something more complicated, something I am still working out the shape of. I thought about the fair in 1984, about the ticket booth, about a laugh you could hear from 3 booths away. I thought about Thomas in the delivery room 38 years ago. The way they handed him to me before they had even finished cleaning him up, and the way I felt, the absolute certainty of it. Like something had arrived that I had been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. I did not need a DNA panel to tell me what that moment was. I was there. I know what happened. There is a photograph on my refrigerator. Thomas is 6 years old in it. He is wearing a baseball uniform, holding a bat, squinting into the sun because I always forgot to position him properly before I took the picture. He is grinning the way 6-year-olds grin, completely and without reservation, like smiling is the easiest thing in the world. Margaret took the picture. You can see my shadow at the edge of the frame, the long shadow of a man standing in the afternoon light, watching his son. I used to look at that photograph and see exactly what I always thought it was. A father, a son, a summer afternoon, something simple and solid and permanent. I still see that. The facts are different now, but what I see is the same. Because the facts were never the whole story. The whole story is 38 years of showing up, of driving in the dark when the phone rings, of sitting in hospital hallways and conference rooms and signing whatever papers need to be signed and doing whatever tests need to be done. The whole story is a 6-year-old squinting into the sun and a man casting a shadow at the edge of the frame who would not move from that spot for anything. Biology is where life starts. But it is not where life is made. Life is made in all the ordinary moments that come after, in the accumulated weight of days spent choosing to be present. I chose that every day for 38 years, and I will choose it for however many years I have left. Thomas is my son. He has always been my son. He will always be my son. Nothing has changed. Some things were always true. Now, I want to ask you something. Something I have been thinking about since the day I sat in that hospital conference room and heard something that should have broken me. What is it that makes a father? Is it the biology, the legal fact, the name on a birth certificate? Or is it the decision, made quietly and without ceremony, every single ordinary day, to stay? I spent a night thinking I had lost everything. Then I drove to a hospital and discovered that the only thing that had changed was my understanding of how much I'd had to begin with. If this story resonated with you, if it touched something in your own life, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that family is built, not just born. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe to Companion Saga. I will be here every week with stories about real lives, hard choices, and the kind of love that doesn't require a test to prove itself. I will see you in the next one.